Mr David Shoebridge.
Mr President, on the 16th of January 1988, in the early hours of the morning, a 17-year-old Aboriginal boy, Mark Anthony Haines, was found dead on the train tracks outside Tamworth. It had been pouring with rain that night. At all times, Mark's death has been treated as suspicious. The circumstances and the manner of his death, however, have not been determined, despite 2 coronial inquests, each of which returned open findings. The forensic and police accounts given at the inquests raise far more questions than they answer. Mark was last seen and saying goodbye to his girlfriend at approximately 3:30am that morning. Sometime after 3:30am, a train driver travelling north from Werris Creek to Tamworth thought he'd struck a sheep. He resolved to closely check the tracks when he returned over the same tracks heading south about an hour later. When he did, he saw a body lying prone between the tracks and called for assistance to the Tamworth station assistant. When the station assistant and paramedics arrived, they found Mark's body lying between the tracks with his head to the south, his feet to the north, and remarkably, his head resting upon a towel. The working theory from police that was delivered at 2 coronial inquests was that Mark had travelled in a stolen car which had crashed and turned over approximately 1.5 kilometres from where his body was found. Then, in the pouring rain on a dark night, he'd walked away from Tamworth, having climbed up a steep embankment and travelled along 1.5 kilometres of railway line, including over a narrow, dangerous bridge carrying stolen goods. Mark was then thought to have laid down between the tracks and waited until the train arrived, when he'd raised his head and been struck by the train. The forensic evidence at the coronial inquest made it clear that Mark died from traumatic head injury and he'd suffered substantial blood loss. The remarkable prospect from the forensic investigation was that Mark had tumbled under the train and ended up with his head resting on the towel after being struck by it. Despite his substantial blood loss, when the paramedics removed Mark's body and the towel, they saw a stain of blood only approximately the size of a 50-cent coin under the towel. Despite it raining heavily that night, Mark's shoes had no mud on them. Despite there being a significant number of objects nearby, many of them were collected by the family the following day and taken to police. None of the objects were fingerprinted. The stolen car, 1.5 kilometres from Mark's body, was also not fingerprinted. The investigation that was carried out by the Oxley Local Area Command could at best be described as substandard. Mark's family continue to be critical of both the extent and the quality of the investigation. And the working theory that was presented by police at the coronial investigations is clearly, utterly untenable. Mark's parents and many of his family members have since passed away. One of his last remaining relatives, Uncle Don Craigie, a Gomeroi elder, has been seeking answers since 1988. He's given that commitment to Mark's parents before they died. I met with Uncle Don in Tamworth last month. He still has a fire in his belly and is demanding justice for Mark. And his commitment has been vitally important because without him, Mark's death may well have been forgotten entirely. As Uncle Don said, it's sad, but no one cared about a dead Aboriginal teenage boy in Tamworth in the late 80s. Thankfully, fresh information continues to come to light. In 2001, fresh witnesses came forward giving evidence of a group of people being seen around the crashed car earlier that fateful morning, but nothing more was done by police. In April this year, another witness contacted Crime Stoppers. That witness's details were provided to the Oxley Command. It was not the first time she'd contacted police. To date, the police have still not taken a statement from her. That witness and her daughter would be in a position to tell police that her own son had tragically taken his life a little over 6 months after Mark died. Crucially, he told his family he had driven the stolen car on the night of Mark's death. He also left 3 notes before he died. One has since been destroyed, but the other 2 are potentially still able to be obtained, at least if you look. To find out this detail, however, it would be essential that police treat Mark's death with the seriousness it deserves and, at the very least, interview the witnesses in person and take formal statements. It's hard to understand why that hasn't already happened. Today I call on the New South Wales Police to recognise that the investigative efforts of the Local Area Command have to date been inadequate. The case remains open, but for the family and community to have faith in the police investigation, there needs to be a break with the past. For this reason, I am today writing to the New South Wales Police Commissioner seeking to have the investigation into Mark's deaths transferred to the Homicide Squad. A lot has changed in policing since 1988. I recognise that. But for Mark's family, they are still living with the failures of the past. Uncle Don Craigie will not rest till justice is done, and nor should any of us.
Hear, hear.